The crew of the Aurora was going about their routine when the alert sirens blared echoing through the cramped corridors. Captain James Monroe glanced at the main screen, his eyes widening at the sight of an enormous alien vessel approaching their outpost. It was unlike anything he had ever seen, sleek and imposing with intricate designs that glimmered against the backdrop of the stars. "All hands on deck," Monroe shouted as he rushed to the command center. His heart raced with a mix of anticipation and trepidation. The crew gathered around the console, eyes fixed on the screen. As the alien ship drew closer, they had heard stories of encounters with otherworldly beings, but nothing had prepared them for this moment. The ship docked with a low hum, and the air was thick with tension as they awaited the arrival of their unexpected guest. Moments later, the airlock hissed open, and a figure emerged. She was tall and regal, her presence commanding attention even among seasoned crew members. Her skin shimmered like polished silver, and her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light. Queen Solara stepped onto the Aurora with an air of authority, her gaze sweeping over the crew, assessing them. She spoke with a melodic voice that held a mixture of power and urgency. "I am Queen Solara of the Varanthia Empire," she announced. "My ship has sustained critical damage, and I require assistance." Monroe straightened his posture, instinctively respecting her title, but his instincts screamed caution. He gestured for her to follow him as he led her to the conference room, where they could discuss the situation further. The crew exchanged glances filled with curiosity and uncertainty. Once inside, Solara took a seat, her posture regal yet slightly strained. The crew was on edge as Monroe began to inquire about her needs. "Repairs and supplies were necessary," she explained, "but there was a catch. Her ship was designed for interstellar travel, and she needed the Aurora's technology to complete the repairs. We will need to use your ship to reach the nearest starbase," she said, her eyes locking onto Monroe's. The request hung in the air, laden with implications. The crew shifted uncomfortably, glancing at each other, uncertain of how to respond. Monroe furrowed his brow, assessing the situation. He understood the need for assistance, but a human ship was not just a tool, it was their home. There was a deep-seated reluctance to let an alien monarch take control of their vessel. "Your Highness," he began carefully, "we cannot simply hand over our ship for your use without assurances. We need to know your intentions and why this journey is so crucial." Solara regarded him with a mix of frustration and intrigue, her expression unyielding. "My intentions are to restore peace to the galaxy," she replied, her voice firm. "I seek to unite the fractured factions before a war erupts that could consume us all, but the journey is perilous. I cannot navigate these treacherous territories without your ship." Monroe felt the weight of her words. There was an urgency in her voice that sparked a flicker of hope within him. Yet he could not ignore the unease in his crew. They were not ready to trust her. They had fought for their survival and were wary of outsiders. As the tension in the room mounted, Solara leaned forward, her gaze piercing. "Please understand, my people are in danger, as are yours. We must work together to face this threat. If we do not join forces now, it may be too late." Monroe's heart raced as he considered her proposition. The fate of two species rested on this fragile alliance. Could they truly trust her? He glanced at his crew, searching for a sign of agreement, but he knew the decision rested on his shoulders. The weight of leadership bore down heavily as he prepared to respond. Captain Monroe took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the moment pressing down on him. The air in the room felt thick with anticipation as he surveyed the expressions of his crew. They were a mixture of skepticism and curiosity, eyes darting between him and Queen Solara, who awaited his response with an intensity that made him uneasy. "Your Highness," he began slowly, "I understand the urgency of your request and the potential for cooperation, but we need assurances that our ship and crew will be safe during this journey." Solara's gaze hardened slightly as she nodded in acknowledgement. "I understand your concerns," she replied, her voice steady. "I would expect no less from a leader. You must know that I have much to lose as well. My empire is on the brink of collapse. If we do not act swiftly, the rival factions are gathering their forces, and I fear a war is imminent." Monroe felt a flicker of sympathy for her plight, but he also sensed the underlying tension in her words. It was clear that she was accustomed to wielding power and influence, yet he could not shake the feeling that this was a precarious gamble. "We have fought hard to protect our own territory," he stated firmly. "We are not willing to risk everything for an uncertain alliance." Solara regarded him with an inscrutable expression, her eyes glimmering with a mixture of determination and vulnerability. "Then allow me to prove my sincerity," she said, leaning forward. "If you permit me to travel aboard the Aurora, I will share with you the resources and knowledge of my empire. I can offer advanced technology and strategic insights that could aid your survival as well as mine." Monroe considered her offer. The prospect of accessing advanced alien technology was enticing, yet a part of him remained cautious. He knew the stakes were high and the risks involved in aligning with an alien queen. "Let us take a vote," he declared, turning to his crew. "I want everyone to voice their opinions. This decision affects us all." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room as the crew began to express their thoughts. Some voiced concerns about the potential dangers of trusting Solara, while others were intrigued by the possibilities of collaboration. As the discussion unfolded, Solara listened intently, her expression revealing little, but Monroe could see the tension in her posture. She was fighting to maintain her composure as the humans debated her presence and intentions. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Monroe raised his hand for silence. He spoke. "I believe in the need for caution, but I also see the potential for growth. If we can navigate this carefully, I propose we allow Queen Solara to accompany us on a short mission to evaluate her intentions and the potential benefits of this alliance." Solara's eyes widened with surprise, but there was a flicker of hope within them. "I accept your terms," she replied, her voice strong and unwavering, "but know that I will not tolerate betrayal from your side either." With a tentative agreement reached, the atmosphere shifted slightly. The crew began to see Solara not just as a monarch, but as a potential ally, someone who might hold the key to a future that was more than mere survival. As preparations began for their mission, Monroe felt a renewed sense of purpose. Deep down, he knew they were stepping into uncharted territory, but perhaps this alliance could lead to something greater than they had ever imagined, a chance for peace in a galaxy on the brink of war. The Aurora buzzed with activity as the crew prepared for the upcoming mission. Captain Monroe stood at the command center, reviewing the navigational charts and finalizing their course to the rival faction's stronghold. Solara was nearby, observing the humans as they worked. Her presence brought a mix of intrigue and tension that filled the air. As they approached the ship's launch bay, Monroe turned to Solara, who was examining the ship's systems with keen interest. "It's a sturdy vessel," he said, trying to ease the underlying tension in the air. "We've modified it for deep space travel." She nodded her appreciation, and a hint of respect flashed across her features. "Your technology is impressive," she replied, her voice laced with sincerity. "It will serve us well on this mission." Monroe felt a sense of satisfaction at her acknowledgement, but he also sensed the weight of expectation on their shoulders. They were not just embarking on a routine operation, they were stepping into a larger conflict that could determine the fate of their worlds. The crew gathered around as Monroe laid out the mission parameters. "We will infiltrate the rival faction's territory, gather intelligence on their operations, and recover any stolen technology that could threaten both our peoples. Our primary goal is to remain undetected." Solara added, her voice steady and commanding. "We cannot afford to engage in open conflict unless absolutely necessary." As they launched into the void, the atmosphere aboard the ship shifted from apprehension to determination. The crew shared stories of their past battles and dreams for a brighter future, bonding over their shared goals. The tension began to dissipate as they worked side by side. Hours passed as they traveled deeper into enemy territory. Solara and Monroe stood at the helm, monitoring their approach. She pointed to a flickering light on the radar, indicating an enemy patrol near their route. "We need to adjust course," she instructed swiftly. Monroe nodded and made the necessary changes. As he did, he couldn't help but notice how Solara's instincts mirrored his own. In the heat of the moment, they were becoming a cohesive unit. As they navigated through asteroid fields and avoided detection, Solara began to share insights about the rival faction, their weaknesses and strengths. Her knowledge was extensive, and Monroe found himself impressed by her strategic thinking. The crew listened intently, absorbing the information as they realized that this alliance was becoming more than a mere necessity. It was a partnership built on mutual respect. They finally reached the outskirts of the enemy stronghold, a heavily fortified base, surrounded by a web of defense systems. Silura's expression shifted to one of focus. "This is where we will have to rely on stealth and cunning," she said, her voice low. "We can't afford to be detected, or we will lose everything we've worked for." Monroe turned to his crew. "This is it, everyone. We've come too far to turn back now. Let's move out in teams, keep communication open, and remember our objectives." As they disembarked, he felt a surge of adrenaline coursing through him. They were not just fighting for survival, but for a chance to create something greater than themselves. As they infiltrated the base, moving silently through dimly lit corridors, Silura led the way, her alien senses attuned to the environment. They navigated through security checkpoints, using her knowledge of the faction's technology to bypass systems. Monroe couldn't help but admire her confidence and skill. Suddenly, the silence shattered as an alarm blared throughout the facility, red lights flashing. As they were discovered, Monroe cursed under his breath. The stakes had just escalated. They had to act quickly or risk losing their only chance at reclaiming the technology that could shift the balance of power in the galaxy. The mission was no longer just about gathering intelligence. It was now a fight for survival, and the survival of two worlds hung in the balance. Panic surged through the crew as the alarm blared its shrill warning, echoing off the metallic walls. Monroe quickly rallied everyone. "We need to regroup and find cover," he shouted, urgency propelling him forwards. Silura moved with fluid grace, her eyes scanning for the nearest exit as the crew darted into a side corridor. They could hear the sounds of approaching footsteps and shouts in the distance. Adrenaline fueled their movements. As they ducked behind crates and machinery, the tension in the air was palpable, each member of the crew acutely aware that their lives depended on quick thinking and teamwork. Silura pulled Monroe aside, her voice urgent. "We need to find the central control room. If we can access their systems, we can turn off the alarm and buy ourselves time." Monroe nodded, appreciating her insight, but time was running out. They maneuvered through the dimly lit halls, their footsteps silent as they approached the heart of the base. The closer they got, the more intense the sounds of their pursuers became. The crew's breaths quickened as they reached the door to the control room. It was locked and heavily fortified. Monroe glanced at Silura, who stepped forward, her fingers deftly working on the control panel. Within moments, the door slid open, revealing a room filled with monitors and blinking lights. They slipped inside, locking the door behind them. Inside the control room, Silura immediately moved to the main console, her fingers dancing over the controls as she accessed the enemy's systems. Monroe watched in awe as she navigated through the complex interface. With ease, her expertise shone through as she worked to disable the alarms. "I can shut down the security systems, but we need to act quickly," she said, glancing at the crew who were stationed at the door, keeping watch. "They can breach this room at any moment." Monroe nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility as he addressed the crew. "We need a distraction," he said. "We can't let them know we're here. We need to buy Silura time to work. If we can create chaos outside, we might just have a chance." A young crew member named Alex stepped forward. "I can set off some explosives in the storage area. It will draw their attention away from us." Monroe felt a rush of admiration for the bravery of his crew, but the risk was immense. "Do it," Monroe ordered. "Keep it contained, but make sure it's loud enough to create confusion." As Alex nodded and slipped out of the room, Monroe turned back to Silura, who was focused intently on the console. "Almost there," she murmured, her expression fierce. "Just a few more seconds." The tension in the room mounted as they heard footsteps approaching the door. Monroe felt his heart race. They didn't have much time. With a final keystroke, Silura grinned. As the alarms fell silent, the monitors flickered and then went dark. "We have a moment of respite," she said, her voice steady. "Now we can move without detection, but we need to act quickly." As they prepared to leave the control room, Monroe felt a surge of hope. They had turned the tide in their favor, but he knew that danger still lurked around every corner. Stepping out into the corridor, they moved stealthily as a unit. With the alarm silenced, they navigated through the now quiet facility. Silura led them to a storage room filled with advanced technology and weaponry. "We need to gather as much as we can carry," she said, urgency lacing her voice. Monroe's crew sprang into action, collecting equipment and technology that could prove invaluable for both their worlds. The weight of their mission felt heavy yet exhilarating. They were on the brink of reclaiming what had been lost, and perhaps gaining an edge in the conflict ahead. Just as they finished loading their supplies, a group of enemy soldiers entered the corridor, forcing them to quickly hide behind crates. Monroe's heart raced as he signaled for silence. They were so close to escape, yet so perilously close to discovery. Celera's eyes narrowed as she listened intently to the soldiers' conversations. She turned to Monroe. "This way," she whispered, pointing to a back exit leading them away from danger. They slipped through the door, moving as silently as shadows, their resolve stealing with every step toward freedom and the chance to change their fate. As they slipped through the narrow passageway, the tension was thick in the air. Each footstep felt heavy with the weight of their mission and the imminent threat behind them. Monroe led the way, his instincts guiding him as they navigated the maze of corridors. Celera followed closely, her keen senses alert for any signs of danger. The passageway opened up into a dimly lit chamber filled with crates and machinery, the remnants of stolen technology scattered throughout. They needed to move quickly, but the adrenaline coursing through their veins made it hard to focus. Monroe turned to Celera. Her expression was fierce determination etched into her features. "This is where we can make our stand," she said, her voice low. "If we can set up a defensive position, we might be able to hold them off long enough to secure our escape." Monroe nodded, understanding the urgency in her words. He quickly rallied his crew. "All right, everyone. We need to fortify this position. Grab anything that can serve as a barricade and prepare for a fight." As they moved to gather supplies, the tension mounted. Footsteps echoed in the distance, signaling the approach of the enemy. Alex, a young technician, started stacking crates against the door, while another crew member, Rachel, prepared weapons they had managed to scavenge from the storage room. The adrenaline fueled their movements as they transformed the chamber into a makeshift stronghold. Celera moved among them, her presence commanding. She offered strategic advice, helping the crew position themselves effectively. As Monroe watched, he felt a swell of respect for her. She was no longer just an alien queen, but a fierce ally fighting alongside them. As the sounds of approaching footsteps grew louder, Monroe took a deep breath, adrenaline surging through his veins. This was at the moment of truth. He glanced around at his crew, their faces filled with determination and fear. They were ready to fight for their survival. The door rattled as enemy soldiers pounded against it. Monroe's heart raced. He signaled for silence. As they all readied their weapons, the tension in the room was palpable, each member of the crew holding their breath in anticipation. With a deafening crash, the door burst open, sending splintered wood flying into the room. The enemy soldiers poured in, weapons drawn ready for confrontation. But Monroe and his crew were prepared. They opened fire in unison. The sounds of blasters ringing out echoed through the chamber. Celera fought alongside them, her movements fluid and precise as she took down enemies with calculated strikes. Monroe marveled at her skill and the fierce determination that drove her. She fought it as if the fate of her empire depended on it, and in that moment he realized it truly did. The battle raged on. As the crew pushed back against the overwhelming odds, they fought fiercely, every shot fired, every movement executed with purpose. The enemy soldiers were relentless, but the humans held their ground, drawing strength from their newfound alliance with Celera. Monroe found himself side by side with Celera as they took cover behind a crate together. They strategized their next move. "We need to flank them," she said, her voice steady. "We can create a diversion that draws their fire while the others secure the exit." He nodded, appreciating her tactical mind. As they worked together to coordinate their attack, he felt a sense of camaraderie that transcended their differences. They were allies in the truest sense of the word, united in their fight for survival. Just as they executed their plan, the room erupted into chaos. Explosions rocked the chamber and debris flew everywhere. The crew fought valiantly, but it was clear they were outnumbered. They needed to regroup and find a way out. "We can't hold them off much longer," Monroe shouted, rallying his crew. "We have to fall back to the exit." Celera nodded, understanding the urgency as they pushed their way toward the back of the room, their hearts pounding as they navigated through the chaos. As they neared the exit, Celera turned to Monroe, her eyes fierce with determination. "We will not let them take us alive. We will fight for our worlds." Until the very end, he felt a surge of hope and defiance as they charged forward together, ready to face whatever awaited them outside the chamber. Their alliance had forged a bond stronger than any fear they might face. As they burst through the back exit, the cool air hit them like a wave, but there was no time to breathe. The sounds of chaos followed closely behind. Monroe led the way, his heart pounding in his chest as they raced toward the ship's landing zone. The path was littered with debris and the remnants of battle, but the urgency of their escape pushed them forward. Celera moved beside him, her presence a fierce reminder of their shared purpose. "We need to reach the Aurora," she urged. "We can't allow them to cut us off." Monroe nodded, feeling the weight of their mission heavy on his shoulders. They were not just fighting for their own survival, but for the future of their worlds. As they sprinted through the compound, the sounds of explosions echoed in the distance. Their enemies were relentless, but the crew fought with a newfound resolve, fueled by their shared goal. They had come too far to turn back now. Suddenly, a volley of energy blasts erupted from the shadows, forcing them to take cover behind a crumbling wall. The enemy was regrouping, and they would soon be overwhelmed. Monroe felt a surge of panic, but he quickly pushed it aside. They had to find a way to gain the upper hand. Celera glanced at him, her expression fierce. "We need a distraction," she said, her voice low and urgent. "I can create an electromagnetic pulse that will disable their weapons. It will give us a window to escape." Monroe's heart raced at the thought, but he knew the risks involved. "Do it," he commanded as he signaled for the crew to prepare for the next wave of attackers. Celera nodded, determination etched into her features. She moved to a nearby console, her fingers dancing over the controls as she initiated the pulse. The air crackled with energy, and then a brilliant flash illuminated the area. As the pulse released, it swept through the compound, disabling enemy weapons and plunging them into chaos. Monroe seized the moment. Now was their chance. "Go, go, go," he shouted as they charged forward, using the confusion to their advantage. They raced toward the landing zone, where the Aurora awaited, their hearts pounding in unison as they pushed through the chaos. The crew moved as a unit, firing back at any enemies who dared to pursue them. Celera fought valiantly by their side, her skills shining as she took down foes with precision, every movement calculated and deliberate. They were a force to be reckoned with. As they neared the Aurora, Monroe could see the ship's sleek silhouette against the backdrop of the stars. Hope surged within him. They were almost there, but just as they reached the landing platform, a group of enemy soldiers appeared, blocking their path. Monroe's heart sank, but he quickly rallied his crew. "We can't stop now. We fight together," he shouted, determination igniting their spirits. They faced the soldiers head-on, energy blasts illuminating the night as they engaged in a fierce battle. Celera moved with them, her fierce loyalty inspiring the crew as they fought for their survival. They pressed forward, pushing through the enemy ranks with every shot fired. They created an opening, their resolve unwavering. Finally, they broke through the last line of defense and surged toward the ship. Monroe felt a rush of relief as they boarded the Aurora, his crew filing in behind him. But their fight was far from over. "We need to get the ship powered up now," Celera urged as she took her place at the navigation console. Monroe moved to the controls, his fingers flying over the keys as he initiated the startup sequence. The ship hummed to life, but the alarms blared as enemy reinforcements approached. They were running out of time. Monroe's heart raced as he glanced at Celera. She met his gaze, her expression fierce. "We can do this together," he said, his voice steady. She nodded as they both focused on the task at hand. The crew worked frantically, securing weapons and preparing for takeoff. As the ship's engines roared to life, the sounds of battle echoed outside, but they were ready to fight their way out. Celera took a deep breath as she prepared for their escape. "This is it," she said, "we're leaving now." With a final surge of adrenaline, Monroe initiated the launch sequence. The ship lifted off the ground just as enemy fire erupted around them. They soared into the sky, escaping the chaos below. But the fight was not over yet. They had much to face ahead, and their newfound alliance would be tested in ways they could not yet imagine. As the Aurora ascended into the vastness of space, The crew let out a collective sigh of relief, but the celebration was short-lived. Monroe quickly scanned the displays for any signs of enemy ships. Their escape had been too easy, and instinct warned him that the battle was far from over. Silura moved to the tactical console, her expression focused as she analyzed their surroundings. "We need to get as far away from that base as possible," she said, urgency lacing her voice. Monroe nodded, but before he could issue orders, the warning alarms blared again. "Multiple enemy ships are pursuing us," she announced, the screen flashing red with alerts. Monroe's stomach dropped as he watched the enemy vessels close in on their position. They had expected retaliation, but not this quickly. "All crew to battle stations," Monroe shouted, adrenaline surging through him. They needed to act fast. As the crew scrambled into position, he felt the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. They were a ragtag group of humans, and an alien queen fighting for their survival. Silura took her place at the navigation controls. "I'll plot a course through the asteroid field. It will give us some cover, but it will be dangerous," she warned, her voice steady and commanding. "Do it," Monroe replied, feeling a mix of fear and determination. They had faced danger before, but this was different. Their alliance had brought them this far, and he wouldn't let it falter now. As Silura maneuvered the ship into the asteroid field, the crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the incoming enemy ships. Weapons charged and ready, they could see the enemy vessels closing in on them, their sleek forms cutting through the void with predatory precision. Monroe felt his pulse quicken as he watched Silura navigate through the field, her hands moving deftly over the controls, avoiding collisions with the massive asteroids that floated in their path. The tension in the cockpit was palpable as every crew member held their breath. "We need to split their formation," Silura suggested. "If we can create a diversion, we can outmaneuver them." Monroe nodded, knowing that they had to act quickly. He turned to the weapons officer. "Alex, prepare to fire on the nearest ship." As the first shots were fired, the enemy vessels returned fire, their blasts lighting up the darkness of space. The Aurora shook under the impact, but they held their course, Silura expertly guiding them through the chaos. Monroe barked orders, coordinating their defensive maneuvers. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As they fought to protect their ship and their lives, they needed to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. Silura's voice rang out over the comms. "I'm setting up a collision course with that asteroid." She pointed to a massive rock looming ahead. "If we time it right, we can lose them in the debris." "Do it," Monroe commanded, feeling a rush of excitement. As they executed the plan, the ship veered sharply toward the asteroid. Just as enemy ships followed suit, the crew braced for impact as they navigated through the treacherous terrain. The Aurora shuddered as they passed dangerously close to the asteroid's surface. Silura's hands flew over the controls, guiding them with precision. They dodged enemy fire and debris alike as the chaos erupted behind them. With a final burst of speed, they shot through a narrow gap between two massive asteroids and emerged into the clear. The enemy ships had been caught off guard, momentarily thrown into disarray. Monroe felt a surge of triumph as he glanced at Silura, who shared his excitement. "We did it," he shouted, but there was no time to celebrate. They had to get as far away as possible before the enemy regrouped. "Plot a course for the nearest safe zone," he ordered. "We need to report back to command and inform them of what we discovered." Silura nodded and began inputting the new coordinates, her expression focused. As the ship sped away from danger, Monroe took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had come together against the odds and fought side by side. Their bond had deepened in ways he never anticipated, but the fight was far from over. They had only begun to understand the true nature of the threat that loomed over their worlds, and he knew that their alliance would be tested in the days to come. But for now they had survived, and that was a victory in itself. As the Aurora ascended into the vastness of space, the crew let out a collective sigh of relief, but the celebration was short-lived. Monroe quickly scanned the displays for any signs of enemy ships. Their escape had been too easy, and instinct warned him that the battle was far from over. Silura moved to the tactical console, her expression focused as she analyzed their surroundings. "We need to get as far away from that base as possible," she said, urgency lacing her voice. Monroe nodded, but before he could issue orders, the warning alarms blared again. "Multiple enemy ships are pursuing us," she announced, the screen flashing red with alerts. Monroe's stomach dropped as he watched the enemy vessels close in on their position. They had expected retaliation, but not this quickly. "All crew to battle stations," Monroe shouted, adrenaline surging through him. They needed to act fast. As the crew scrambled into position, he felt the weight of leadership heavy on his shoulders. They were a ragtag group of humans and an alien queen fighting for their survival. Solara took her place at the navigation controls. "I'll plot a course through the asteroid field. It will give us some cover, but it will be dangerous," she warned, her voice steady and commanding. "Do it," Monroe replied, feeling a mix of fear and determination. They had faced danger before, but this was different. Their alliance had brought them this far, and he wouldn't let it falter now. As Solara maneuvered the ship into the asteroid field, the crew worked tirelessly to prepare for the incoming enemy ships. Weapons charged and ready, they could see the enemy vessels closing in on them, their sleek forms cutting through the void with predatory precision. Monroe felt his pulse quicken as he watched Solara navigate through the field, her hands moving deftly over the controls, avoiding collisions with the massive asteroids that floated in their path. The tension in the cockpit was palpable as every crew member held their breath. "We need to split their formation," Solara suggested. "If we can create a diversion, we can outmaneuver them." Monroe nodded, knowing that they had to act quickly. He turned to the weapons officer. "Alex, prepare to fire on the nearest ship." As the first shots were fired, the enemy vessels returned fire, their blasts lighting up the darkness of space. The Aurora shook under the impact, but they held their course, Solara expertly guiding them through the chaos. Monroe barked orders, coordinating their defensive maneuvers. He could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins. As they fought to protect their ship and their lives, they needed to stay one step ahead of their pursuers. Solara's voice rang out over the comms. "I'm setting up a collision course with that asteroid." She pointed to a massive rock looming ahead. "If we time it right, we can lose them in the debris." "Do it," Monroe commanded, feeling a rush of excitement. As they executed the plan, the ship veered sharply toward the asteroid. Just as enemy ships followed suit, the crew braced for impact as they navigated through the treacherous terrain. The Aurora shuddered as they passed dangerously close to the asteroid's surface. Solara's hands flew over the controls, guiding them with precision. They dodged enemy fire and debris alike as the chaos erupted behind them. With a final burst of speed, they shot through a narrow gap between two massive asteroids and emerged into the clear. The enemy ships had been caught off guard, momentarily thrown into disarray. Monroe felt a surge of triumph as he glanced at Solara, who shared his excitement. "We did it," he shouted, but there was no time to celebrate. They had to get as far away as possible before the enemy regrouped. "Plot a course for the nearest safe zone," he ordered. "We need to report back to command and inform them of what we discovered." Solara nodded and began inputting the new coordinates, her expression focused. As the ship sped away from danger, Monroe took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had come together against the odds and fought side by side. Their bond had deepened in ways he never anticipated, but the fight was far from over. They had only begun to understand the true nature of the threat that loomed over their worlds, and he knew that their alliance would be tested in the days to come. But for now they had survived, and that was a victory in itself. As the Aurora sped away from the asteroid field, Monroe felt a mix of relief and tension wash over him. They had escaped the immediate threat, but the reality of their situation loomed large. The enemy was still out there, and the stakes were higher than ever. Solara was at the navigation console, her expression serious as she plotted their course toward the nearest safe zone. The atmosphere in the cockpit was heavy with unspoken worries, each crew member aware that they were now targets in a larger conflict. "Once we reach the safe zone, we need to regroup and strategize," Monroe said, breaking the silence, his voice steady. "We've gathered valuable intel, but we must be prepared for the next move." Solara nodded, her eyes focused on the screens displaying their trajectory. "I agree," she replied. "The enemy will not rest until they recover what we took from them. Their technology is too valuable, and their resolve is fierce. We must anticipate their next steps." As they traveled through the vastness of space, Monroe felt a sense of urgency building within him. They were on borrowed time, and he needed to ensure the safety of his crew. He turned to Solara. Her insight had proven invaluable, but he knew there was much more to discuss. "What do you know about the factions pursuing us?" he asked. His curiosity piqued. Her knowledge could provide critical context to their situation. She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "The factions are divided into 3 major groups," she began, "each with its own agenda, but all are vying for control of the galaxy. They see our alliance as a threat, and they will do everything in their power to dismantle it." Monroe nodded, absorbing the information. It was a complex web of political maneuvering and power struggles, and they were caught in the middle. The realization weighed heavily on him, but he was determined to not let fear dictate their actions. As they neared the safe zone, Solara began to outline a plan. "We should contact our respective commands and share our findings," she said. "We need to establish a united front if we are to stand any chance against the factions." Monroe felt a surge of hope at her words. He understood the importance of collaboration and the strength that came from unity. It was a chance to forge a new alliance, one that could change the course of the impending conflict. Just as they prepared to send a transmission, the ship's sensors blared and alert enemy vessels were detected approaching rapidly. Monroe's heart raced as he turned to Solara. "We can't let them intercept us," he said. "We need to buy time for the transmission." Solara's eyes narrowed as she assessed the situation. "We can use the ship's cloaking device to hide us temporarily," she said. "It will give us a few moments to send the message and regroup." Monroe nodded, knowing the risk they had to take it. "Activate the cloaking device," he ordered. As the crew moved into action, the ship shimmered and then faded from view. They were hidden from sight, but he knew it wouldn't last long. The enemy would be searching for them. As they sent the transmission to their commands, Monroe felt a rush of urgency. Every second counted. They needed to establish their alliance before the enemy discovered their location. The message went through, and they received confirmation from both sides that reinforcements would be on their way. But just as hope surged within him, the enemy ships appeared on their sensors again. "They're closing in," Solara warned. "We need to prepare for engagement." Monroe felt a surge of adrenaline as he turned to his crew. "We've come too far to back down now," he shouted. "Ready your weapons, we fight together." The crew responded with fierce determination as they took their positions, ready to defend their ship and their newfound alliance. The enemy ships moved closer, and the tension in the cockpit was palpable. Monroe glanced at Solara, who met his gaze with a fierce resolve. "We can do this," he said, his voice steady. She nodded as they faced the challenge together, their bond forged in the fires of conflict. As the enemy vessels moved into firing range, the Aurora powered up its weapons, ready to retaliate. They would fight for their survival and for the future they had begun to build together. The fight was far from over, but they were ready to face whatever challenges awaited them in the depths of space, united as one against the storm that threatened to consume them all.